this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I've become aware through various comments that because of the Tolumnias that I've got and the attractiveness of the blooms, quite a few others are trying them with varying success. Now, all of my Tolumnias are mounted, but I'll qualify that. That is a way of growing them, and certainly not the only way of growing them. All I will say is that the roots like air, they don't like to be soggy, and they like a fast wet dry cycle. That's the root bit. The plant, quite honestly, is relatively easy going. I mean, they do like a higher humidity in the air, but then most orchids do. You know, that you can just take that as read, really. But from where they come from in the Caribbean basin, on the islands and around that part of the coastline, they do get quite a lot of moist air. You know, that is just inherent with that part of the world. They don't get hot, dry air. They do get hot, though. So they can take some heat, and some of them can even take full sun. But don't forget, full sun in the wild and, you know, sun through glass in artificial conditions is not quite the same thing. The difference being, in that area where they come from, is virtually a constant breeze going on. There's a cooling breeze that just helps keep the leaves cooler. But they, you know, quite a few of the species can be found in full sun for at least part of the day, so they will take it. But I would suggest, if you're going to try it, acclimatise them gently. And don't go from a shady UK winter to outside in full sun in April. Go steady. This is Tolumnia Peach. This one went downhill badly. But I had a session with the Tolumnias during last year where most of them got taken off their mounts and remounted. A lot of that was to refresh the moss. And recently we've had a chat about certain types of wood or bark being more or less suitable. And there are certainly some types of wood that orchid roots just don't like. I'm not sure I've got any of that, but I may have. You know, that's to be decided down the line. But what I will say is this is a pure piece of bark. That's all it is. It's a piece of bark separated from a trunk. Yeah? And there is a difference between using a piece of wood that is from the heartwood of the tree, which is inherently dead, yeah, as opposed to the outside part of the tree, which once was living. Yeah, that's just the way trees work. They thicken up, and as they thicken up, the older sections inside the bark just become dead wood. If you cut through a trunk, you can see the rings. Apparently they represent a year's growth per year, so you can count the rings and see how old the tree is, having just cut it down to count them. Yeah, that works well. But this one's coming on nicely. This is Tolumnia Peach. Had this one a while, and what have we got? We've got effectively 3 new fans on this, so we should get some spikes on this down the line. Actually there's 4 new fans. There's 3 clustered together there. Yeah? Yeah, just those 3, but then there's another one behind coming out there as well. So there's 3 or 4 new growths on this one, new fans as I call them, because they do tend to fan out flat, but they're growths effectively. So this one should bloom down the line. I don't know how long we'll have to wait for spikes on that one, but back to the discussion on wood, the easy way to tell if your orchid likes wood or doesn't is what are the roots doing. And if they're attaching, strongly attaching, they love it. Yeah, and if they maintain their green growing tips while they're attached, they love it. So it's quite a simple thing to see. I mean, Rick sort of demonstrated the problem by showing that, you know, what were actively growing roots just stop. And they don't attach very well. They're obviously objecting to what they're being grown on. So keep your eye on things if you've got mounted orchids. But do bear in mind there is a difference between heartwood and bark. And that is a pure piece of bark, that. And this particular plant likes its mount. So that one's doing well. Right, let's have a look at some more. Okay, now this one was hit bad by the scale, and it's still got many signs of the damage that was being done. All those pale patches on those leaves is bug damage, basically, on the older parts of the plant. But this one's started to pull up now. It's got a new growth sort of there, centre shot. Another one pushing out the side from the same place, and oh blow me, there's a spike. That wasn't there last time I watered it, but this particular part of the plant is growing downwards. It's just the way it's decided to grow. I would have preferred the new growth to come out this side of the plant and grow upwards, but it's growing this way. Again, that's not a mature growth, and it's decided to spike. And this one is pink something. Sunset pink. Well, and it has a spike. These spikes just seem to appear out of nowhere. Now this is a piece of driftwood, and I've always been incredibly iffy about using driftwood. Yeah, if it's been in the sea, it's got salt in it, and how long it actually takes to get all of those salts out, I wouldn't like to say. But this lived out in the garden in all weathers, rained on, sun beating down on it for over 2 years before I even thought about using it, and I still boiled it several times in clean water and checked the colour of the water. But I think this piece of wood must be reasonable because the roots are attaching, so they're obviously okay with it. If that still had salts in it, you know, I think they'd be objecting. So this one's pushing out some reasonable roots now. It has a spike, and it's coming back from the brink. That one nearly got thrown out when I had a sort out, but you know, I'm glad I kept it. Pretty picture, and a very attractive Tolumnia if I can get it to, well, I was going to say if I ever get it to bloom again, but it looks like it's going to try. So that's a spike on that one. Now this is my only species Tolumnia, and when I was losing the plants fast due to the scale, this was the one that didn't go down as anywhere near as much as the others. So obviously this one looks in a much better state because it hadn't gone down so far that it was going to take ages to come back up. Now this currently has 2 spikes. As I say, it's my only species. It's Europhila or Urophila, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But these spikes get to about 2 foot long before they even start showing the buds, or the last time it bloomed it did. This is a good plant. This has new growths in many places. So this is picking up and forming a nice clump now. So on Tolumnias, it's worth mentioning that if you've had one quite a few years, you will get some root dye back. They will go a browny colour. Don't necessarily hack them off because they can still hydrate, but obviously each year you're looking for new root growth to replace the older ones. That's the important stuff. And again, this is on exactly the same type of bark as the first one that I showed you, so I don't expect any problems with where this one's growing. And looking at the way the roots are attaching and maintaining their green tips, it seems to be okay on there. The one thing to watch though, if you've got moss on a mount, don't forget the moss can break down, and when it breaks down it starts to turn acidic, and it will turn your nice clean fresh water into acidic water relatively quickly, unless it dries incredibly fast, in which case it won't happen so much. Yeah? If you've got moss mixed in with bark or something in a pot and it's been in there quite a while, the moss will probably go before the bark does, and because it holds water for quite a long time, that's the idea of having a sort of sphagnum and bark mix, especially with the smaller bark, is to keep it moist. It will get a chance to turn acidic, and the plant roots will start thinking about absorbing that, and they won't be happy. Yeah, but when you've got a very fast wet dry cycle, as the moss breaks down, it can do less damage. I won't say it does no damage, yeah, but a pH drop on a mount that dries in a couple of hours is unlikely compared with something that takes 3 or 4 days to dry off. So I worry less about the moss on mounts than I do in pots. But I've got my repotting date in my notes, and when it gets to a time I think it could do with refreshing, I just highlight that box in red, and it shouts at me every time I update my notes, will you repot me or remount me? Until eventually I get round to doing it, of course. And then we can drop the red and go back to normal again. But all of the Tolumnias were looked at during last year, so I don't anticipate any problems this year. But yeah, that one's coming on nicely. I actually got a culture award at Malvern a couple of years ago, and I didn't, because of where they placed it in the display, I didn't even know I'd got the award. I had to be told, and told to go and look. Have you seen your Tolumnia? No. Why? What's happened to it? I thought they broke the spike or something. I said, well, go and have a look. Go and have a look. Yeah, so that one did well at that particular time. Probably because it was a species. I don't know why people assume a species Tolumnia is harder to bloom. I don't find any difference. This one blooms just as easy as the other Tolumnias, which are all hybrids. So anyway, coming on nicely, that one. 2 spikes, one after the other. Now the others I've shown you I've already watered, but I thought I'd film a couple prior to watering them, just to sort of show the difference. Now this little Tolumnia, it is a small plant. It's never going to get huge. It is just a small version. But it's mainly new growths on here, because this one was almost lost. So from nothing, it's recovering very nicely, and it is pushing out some nice roots. But you can see, I mean, this moss is crispy dry, absolutely crispy dry, yeah? And now it will be absolutely soaking wet, as will the piece of bark. Yeah, I don't actually drop them in to soak them, I just continuously pour water over them. But quite honestly, these could be just thrown in a bucket with their water and feed. You know, getting the plant wet wouldn't matter that much, as long as it doesn't stay down in those leaf joints for any length of time, and as long as it's not cold when that happens. You know, I mean, all plants get rained on. You know, they're going to get absolutely soaking wet. So they don't mind getting soaking wet. What they object to is staying wet. The leaf joint staying soggy when the temperatures drop is just no good. But yeah, roots on this one coming on nicely. Nice little miniature one. And that has got no ID on it, so I'm waiting for it to rebloom. Most of my Tolumnias have bloomed at least once, or were bought in bloom, so I can identify them as soon as I get some blooms. But yeah, in that massive sort of exercise where they all got either thrown out or remounted, I muddled up some tags basically. So where I wasn't sure, I left no tag, and I've got one in my notes that just says Tolumnia hybrid, so it has no tag, it has no name, but I don't know which one it is. We'll find out, process of elimination down the line, but that one's recovering nicely, that one. Now, this one's never been a good plant. It wasn't a good plant when I got it, and it still isn't. This has come so close to getting thrown out so many times. This is Jarrac flyer red butterfly. Or should I say was. I'm hanging on to it because it is producing one little new growth. And if with that new growth it can generate some roots, there's no hope for the older part of the plant. That's never going to rehydrate. It's badly dehydrated and discoloured. Oh, there's another one round the back. Ah, we have hope. Right, it's now got 2 new growths. Yeah, so it has multiple chances of getting a root system going, because the roots it's got are virtually non-existent. They are the old desiccated type, but they are still capable of a bit of hydration, otherwise it wouldn't be growing. But they're not working well. It needs some new ones, and its hope of survival will be those 2 little new growths. Yeah, I would have preferred that one round the back to be on the outside of the fan, because it's going to struggle getting the roots out from that position. They'll be all tangled up in the leaves. However, this little growth is on the outside of the fan. So as long as one of them can get some roots going and help with the hydration and then progress, then that one should make it. But that's a real iffy plant at the moment. But yeah, I mean, that tiny little new growth sat through the winter doing next to nothing. Now it's growing. and it's starting a new one. So there is always hope until it's dead, and then obviously there is no hope. But this one's starting to grow now. Now this is one of the two that are actually in bloom at the moment. And this has got nearly as many distorted flowers as it has good ones, but it's a weak plant. It's only just recovering. It's doing what it can. It is growing some new roots. They are pushing on, and the latest fan has actually got a spike on it, and hopefully I'll see some more new growths on that soon. We looked at that recently, this one, because the bloom's opened, but that's Jarak Flyer, Black Magic, and it's still in a state of recovery. I don't class that one as recovered yet. It hasn't got a good enough root system for the size of the plant yet, but the roots are starting to push out of the moss and get around the bark now. So it's on the mend, not there yet, but on its way. This is the last one. I've just gone away to check my notes because I was just about to say this one's been in bloom since I got it, so it's been in bloom a very long time. This is a second spike. So it's not all on one spike. It did produce one spike that had blooms when I got it. That then branched several times while this spike was progressing, which has also branched 7 times. I've just checked my notes. I got this in September last year, and it's had blooms on it ever since. It's not bad value for money. And the colours on this are gorgeous. Plant-wise, this has been static as a plant and hasn't really done any growing since I got it. All that time it's done no growing, but it's just starting. It's just pushing out a couple of new fans and starting some new roots. Again, this has been living off of those browny sort of desiccated looking roots ever since I got it. But it is just starting into growth now, and associated roots going with those new growths. This one I'm going to watch closely because this piece of bark looks quite different to other pieces I've got. It's much thicker, so I don't believe that's off. It's the same type of wood. So I want to just make sure that these roots don't object to it as they start. So they're only just starting, so there's no point in worrying about the wood yet. But once they progress and get to the point where they could attach to the wood, if they don't, and the tips start, the green tips start to die off, then it's just showing that it's objecting to that wood, at which point it can come straight off and go on something else. But yeah, just coming back into growth, that one. And don't cut your Tolumnia spikes until you're absolutely sure. They turn brown, they die back towards the plant. And once they're doing that, and most of the spike has gone that sort of straw coloured brown that they turn as they die back, then it's had it. You can cut it off. But otherwise, go steady. They can branch out, as this one's been doing for the last whatever September till April is. A long time. So yeah, quick Tolumnia update and progress report, state of play and all that. As I say, I'm aware that a lot more people started growing these a couple of years ago. They went out of fashion. I've got a feeling, I can't confirm it, that they went out of fashion when they were reclassified from, they were called equitant oncidiums, so they're in the Oncidium Alliance, and they don't look like normal oncidiums. There's no pseudobulbs there. They don't grow like oncidiums. Their blooms have similarities to oncidiums, but their growth pattern and where they come from, it's not like oncidiums. So to call them something different in this case, I'm happy with. And I like the word Tolumnia. I just like that classification. So for once, I'm pleased with the name change. And for me, they've always been Tolumnias, so the name change hasn't happened while they were in my ownership. They've always been Tolumnias for me, so I'm happy to call them that. And very rewarding little plants. The spikes push on at quite a rate, and the blooms last reasonably well once they open. They do like reasonable humidity and good light, and They need that fast wet dry cycle. You know, shove them in a soggy pot, you'll probably lose your roots. Nice airy mix, you know, something like lava rock. I mean, some people I've seen growing these in a tiny little terracotta pot, clay pot, with nothing in it. The roots just attached to the pot. So I think the best way to think about Tolumnias is what shall I grow it on, rather than what shall I grow it in, if you see what I mean. And although I'm saying that looking at soggy moss because I've just watered it, in 2 or 3 hours that will be bone dry. So it's still got its daily fast wet dry cycle. The moss just gives it that little bit longer to hydrate, and that's all it's for. And in the winter, obviously the frequency of watering drops right off because they're not growing quite so fast. So they might go 3 days in between waterings, but this time of year it's virtually every day, and they dry every day despite the moss. So that's how I grow them. And they live up near the roof, they don't mind the warmth up there. The air's humid, I very rarely drop down below 60, and I try and maintain 70% at whatever temperature I've got. Obviously the higher the temperature, the more difficult it is to maintain 70%. That's where the foggers work hard. But yeah, so update and report on the Tolumnias. Far less than I used to have, but if I see some, I was hoping there'd be some at the RHS show, but not a light. I think they might have been some on the first day, and they went off like little rockets, so I didn't see any. But if I see some in bloom, and the plants look reasonable, and I like the blooms, I will get more. They don't take up a lot of room, and for me they're easy to grow. So the fact that I've got some doesn't mean I've exhausted the amount of Tolumnias I'm going to have. I used to have 15. Well, I've obviously got a lot less now. I lost a lot. Didn't lose them through bad culture. I lost them through neglect on dealing with scale. And the scale won. It actually won and cost me quite a few of my Tolumnias. They just eat the base of the plant. They're right down in these leaf joints, right down in there, right down in that bit. That's where they get, and they eat their way from the inside out. So they just destroy the fans at the base, you know, which stops new roots and new fans growing. So that's not a good thing to have on Tolumnias, is the old scale. They're not big enough plants to have any strength in them to take it. You know, you have big fat pseudo-bulbs on the normal Oncidium types. A bit of scale might make a few holes here and there, but it's not going to totally destroy the pseudo-bulbs. Well, not unless you leave them for years, I suppose, but it will have a go at these. Anyway, quick update on those. A few people have asked how they're doing, but I don't class this as a requested update. It's just an update. I'm watering my plants today, my mounts, in a different order. And these just happen to be the first ones that are getting watered, so I thought I'd film them. So there you go. See you next time.